morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Jill.
I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Yeah, my name's Andrew Early. I am a staff attorney with Fair Shake Environmental Legal Services. I'm from West Virginia. I live here in Charleston, West Virginia now, but I grew up in Parkersburg and left for a few years for law school, but came back pretty quickly.
I didn't know you grew up in Parkersburg. My aunt, Betty Kay, I spent tons of my summers there and lots of time in Parkersburg. I really like it. I always did. Do you like it compared to Charleston?
Parkersburg was a good place to grow up.
Yeah.
And I never really thought I would live in Charleston growing up, but things just brought me here, and I've really, really enjoyed living in Charleston for lots of reasons. I mean, I get to do the work that I want to do in the state where I wanted to do it, but I'm close to my family back home, and I'm close to so many of kind of the beautiful outdoorsy things that I want to be doing in my free time.
Nice. This is the Kanawha River.
That's right.
Right, and we're at downtown Charleston. There's a little park here. I see they have concerts, and so yeah, I personally will just say I love Parkersburg, but haven't spent much time in Charleston until recently, and it's a beautiful city. It's so clean and historic buildings, and I really love it. And then there's the historic indigenous Native American culture here with the mounds, and I want to talk to you about these new petrochemical facilities that are, it's kind of hard to know what's really going on, or one of them is an expansion, I think, and one of them is Clean Seas, which is basically, isn't it located in kind of like a shopping center right across the street from a high school? What is Clean Seas?
Clean Seas is a proposed facility that's located in Belle, West Virginia, in that area, and it does seem like it is an area that used to be kind of like a shopping center of sorts. It's right off the road right there, off of DuPont Road. Right now it's not operational, but they are working on being operational. The facility itself, what they want to do is a process called pyrolysis, and they want to pyrolysize plastics.
Well, you were on a great roll there, Andrew, but we got distracted. I'm going to blame it on these little ducks that I love that are swimming by quacking, but that's not really it, but it's okay. I'll say that. It's not a lie because they are distracting me right now because I love them. So anyway, we were talking about Clean Seas, and we drove by. It just looks like an abandoned warehouse, and I thought there were like restaurants too, and then there's a high school there. So anyway, I just feel like, why would they choose that location? And anyway, that's maybe not a question you can answer, but do you remember what you were saying when we got interrupted?
I can really only speculate as to why they chose that specific location. It does seem like an odd location to me to do any sort of development, because it is right there by a school and by there are still some restaurants there, but it's certainly not, incredibly populated, but it is kind of in the heart of that part of Belle, and it seems like an odd choice. Probably it comes down to it was where they could find, the space they needed and the price they needed.
And Belle is maybe 15 minutes south of here, of downtown Charleston, so it's not far.
Not far at all. So the Clean Seas facility is right now a proposed facility that has been in the media since at least 2023, but only last week applied for their air quality permit from the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection. And they, at this facility, intend to pyrolysize plastics, which I think is a bit of a science-y way to say that they intend to, melt the plastics down at really, really high temperatures in a low oxygen environment. So in my opinion, it's definitely incineration. And our legislature, our federal Congress agreed back in the 90s when they passed the laws that regulate waste incinerators, and the EPA has stood by that as they've implemented that legislation over the years.
But they've found a way to not be called an incinerator, but in reality, it's kind of what it is. Because if it was an incinerator, would they not be able to be located in that place? They would be stricter regulations, that kind of thing?
I don't know if that's true. I think they could still be located there and doing the things that they want to do. But certainly, Section 129 of the Clean Air Act is the section that deals with incineration units, and it deals with them in such a way that it took special attention to say that, these facilities, they don't always meet the rest of the requirements of the Clean Act for heavier regulation, because those are looking at, how many pollutants are being emitted. And it's doing it in two ways usually. One is dealing with criteria pollutants, which include things like particulate matter, nitrogen oxides, those types of things. And then the other part of it that really is heavily regulated looks at what is considered hazardous air pollutants. And these facilities don't always emit the level of pollutants that would take them into the strictest categories of regulation under the Clean Air Act. But Congress saw a need for them to be regulated because they often emit pollutants that are problematic to human health in any amount.
Right.
And those are the choices that Congress made in the 90s and that are still in place today.
Okay, and I'm trying to remember, and I don't know if I can, but there was, since we're on location, I am getting this little mini computer, which we call a phone, out of my purse, and I want to read this. The facility would be able to produce approximately 4 million gallons of pyrolysis oil annually, which could be used to produce new plastics, fuels, or industrial chemicals. Clean Seas plans to sell the solid residue from pyrolysis as a soil amendment and would reuse the remaining gases in the pyrolysis process or potentially use them to produce hydrogen.
Yeah, so the pyrolysis process, what it does is it takes, in this case, plastic waste, but it could be other types of waste too. But Clean Seas intends to burn plastics. And through that process, they take the plastics in and then they're melted down. And from that, they are able to extract the gases, but not everything becomes a gas. Some of it stays as a waste. Sometimes you'll hear this waste, residual solid waste, referred to as biochar. Other times you'll hear it referred to differently. And it sounds like their plan would be to use the residuals in this case as some marketable product that would be, I would guess, sold to farmers for soil amendments.
But then it's plastic residue? What is it? I'm sorry, but I can't stand that. Like, it upsets, what are they talking about? How could you add plastic that's been burned? And I don't know, it's just so crazy. Why can't it just be normal for once, something normal? That's just too nuts for me.
I would be really curious to see what the residual waste here is actually contains.
Yeah.
What byproducts are left over from the pyrolysis of the plastic feedstock that this facility intends to use, such that it would be suitable as a soil amendment. I think it's going to come down to what the actual, chemical composition and physical makeup of that residue is. But it seems unlikely to me that, when you melt the plastics down, the valuable gases here are what they're really trying to collect. The parts that are left over, it seems at least unlikely to me, without being a scientist, that those are going to be the things that we would want to be, putting in our soil.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to look again here because there was another. The facility would be able to produce approximately 4 million gallons of pyrolysis oil annually. I mean, that's a lot of oil. And so the oil is what they would make plastic out of again, or what?
There are different uses for the py oil, is what is kind of referred to as pyrolysis oil, but I'll probably say py oil a few times.
Okay.
And certainly one of the intended uses for these products is to then be used again to make more plastics. There are a lot of differing views on the utility of it to make plastics again, because plastics are pretty complicated to make. There are tons and tons of different types of plastics, and they all have slightly different chemical composition. But some of them are really durable, and some of them are not. Some of them just could never be. And so what goes into making a plastic is a big part of what determines what that plastic ends up looking like. And some of the concerns that I've seen are that when we use this py oil to make plastics, it's not the kind of plastics that are going to last a long time when they come back out into the market.
Meaning single use again, or meaning what exactly? Like if they're making plastic, part of the issue is that it takes forever to break down and biodegrade, or does it ever? You know what I mean? So it's all so confusing. I'm sorry if I'm not being clear, but it just all confuses me.
Likewise, if I'm not being clear, it's because this is very confusing stuff. It is, I think it's a really interesting kind of concept when I think about it academically. Like, what a lovely idea to be able to take plastics that we do have such a hard time figuring out how to get rid of them, what to do with them as waste. But I think the reality is that this is not likely to be our solution to deal with plastic waste in a sustainable way, in a way that doesn't harm communities, and in a way that helps us build towards a more sustainable environment.
Because didn't you talk about a minute ago the application for an air permit? Or so what hazardous pollutants or volatile organics are they going to be able to produce or emit into that community every year? Does it say?
It does say a little bit, and in their permit application, they are estimating what seems like to me very, very surprisingly low emissions numbers from this. I can actually pull it up to get the numbers from the pretty
read
much
that
the
tiny
last page.
print?
Not very well.
Give him a magnifier. Oh, my duckies! You can keep this in this video. I love you. You're so nice. I don't have any food because I just don't. I don't know if we're supposed to feed you anyway, but get some little fishies. Okay, sorry, I'm back.
That's okay. So what they have placed in their proposed kind of public notice about the facility is that in terms of tons per year, they're looking at 1 ton per year of particulate matter, less than 0.01 tons per year of hydrochloric acid, 0.02 tons per year of sulfur dioxide, 2 tons per year of nitrogen oxides, NOx, and then 6 tons per year of hazardous air pollutants, or HAPs. And those are very low numbers that in a lot of instances, the Clean Air Act wouldn't be too concerned with. But as we talked about a little bit earlier, because this is incineration of waste, the Clean Air Act and our Congress decided that we need to be really worried about these no matter what.
So that came from the air permit application, those figures. Now, how do they have to justify those figures? Can they just put down anything? Does the The regulators have to look at that and say, oh, this is likely, this is unlikely. I mean, I'm just curious about that.
It's a good question, and I don't know if I have like a definite answer for you on how that whole process works out. I think the way that it usually goes is that the applicant works with consultants or engineers, and they figure out based on various modeling and predictions what the estimated pollution is going to be, and then the agency is tasked with determining whether that complies with what the Clean Air Act calls for. And the agency typically has a lot of discretion in how they do that. So I think that the West Virginia DEP definitely has some discretion to say, hey, we don't really understand where these numbers are coming from. Can you show us where you're getting this, how you're getting this? That doesn't mean that that always happens. And that leaves, I think, a lot of open questions for people on the outside, people who don't work, in this particular sector every day, with no way to really get answers as to how those things are truly working.
That makes sense. And so, talking about people who work in this space, what's the biggest concern with these pyrolysis facilities? One is that it's not really, they're labeling it green, but the fact that it's pretty much incineration, and yeah, I don't know, my brain is not working right now because the ducks literally just distracted me. We can't do this next to a river again, Stuart, if the ducks are around. Okay, I'm focused.
I think what is the biggest concern is probably a combination of concerns. Okay. So, we have these regulations in place to regulate these kinds of facilities, people who are incinerating waste. There are exemptions carved out into the Clean Air Act, as there are in lots of environmental statutes. But the concern is that a lot of these proposed facilities, not just here in West Virginia, but across the country, are trying to avoid being regulated under Section 129. And they try to do that in accordance with the law, but in what I would say are some pretty creative ways.
That's a nice way to put it. If this Clean Seas was actually watching this, and what can I say? It seems like what they're doing is really close to incineration, but they're doing everything they can not to be regulated under that, right? And incinerators, if it wasn't an incinerator, would their air emissions be different than what they're projecting they're going to be? Is that just too technical? I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out.
It is challenging, absolutely. I think if they were just purely, open burning the waste, right? No pollution controls, not doing it through this method of pyrolysis, it would be very dirty. That's why we don't burn plastics in our backyard fireplace, When it's done under different environments, all of those same concerns are still there, but there are legitimate ways to reduce the amount of pollutants that do get emitted into the communities. The concern, though, is that when they avoid regulation under Section 129, there's just this gap that they are not going to be properly regulated at all.
Which means no oversight, and there's not as much watching going on by the regulators. Is that true? There's not as much scrutiny, or they might have excessive emissions, but no one's going to know because they're not testing? Is that kind of one of the concerns?
I don't know that is a concern with this specific Clean Seas facility, but that is usually the big concern with minor sources in general, is that when something is a minor source, it is not regulated as strictly as a major source is. So you don't get to the same level of monitoring, you don't get the same level of record keeping. and facilities can make modifications in kind of easier ways when they're minor sources, which is concerning because then if this project, not this specific project, but a project is proposed as a minor source and they just keep modifying year after year, at the end, maybe they are putting out numbers that put them in major source territory, but because of the way that the Clean Air Act is laid out for modifications, they're still regulated as a minor source. And so there are various concerns with minor sources. One is that kind of creeping. The other is that we don't get the kind of regulation that we would get if they were major sources.
Okay, now I want to bring up, I'm here in West Virginia. I love West Virginia, and I could go on and on about all the places I love and all the wonderful experiences and spending a lot of my high school days in Wheeling, West Virginia, and that area. So anyway, love West Virginia. But until yesterday, I had this pretty informed opinion that the regulators suck here. I mean, I'm just saying the regulations suck. You can get away with anything in West Virginia. Is there more of a concern with a pyrolysis facility in West Virginia as being even more of a concern because there is such lack of oversight, or the regulators are lacking here or compromised, or is that something you can even answer? And does it make sense, that question?
It does. The question makes sense, absolutely. It's not an easy question to answer because a lot of these proposed pyrolysis facilities are proposed in states that do have a reputation of being more lax in their regulatory oversight. So there's not like, a comparison that I can think of at least where one of these facilities has been proposed in a state that kind of has a reputation for being more strict in how they regulate air quality permits. I think my experience with most agencies in most states has been that the kind of rank and file people who are hired, they went into that line of work for a reason. Not very many people sign up to, go test your water or think about your soil unless they cared about that at some point in their life. But they are rank and file. I mean, our governments are bureaucratic to a fault. And so they do get overruled probably on somewhat regular basis by people above them who may have different priorities, and I think often do.
You're back there, Stuart. So tell me what else you saw in that high school facility across the street from Clean Seas.
So it looked to me like it was sort of a complex of different things. So there was the Riverside High School, but then in that same building there was a Riverside Health Center, and then a Riverside Public Library, like all in that same complex, which was odd to me. I've never seen a high school like connected to other services like that. A lot of athletic fields there, which is, to me, as a former student athlete, huffing and puffing, it's concerning to have a site like that nearby. And then there's also a Walmart back there, and it looks like a big farm field between the Walmart and I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's just a kind of a fallow piece of land, or it looked almost like it had been planted. And then a Shoney's and the state police, it looks like they have an office there, and then there's the community theater.
Yeah. And I mean, I think as we talked about a little bit, Belle is not a big town. I think on the census tract, it's somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people, and so the hubs of small towns also tend to be fairly small. And I think the high school, as is true in a lot of communities in West Virginia, is a bit of that hub, and that's one of the reasons it doesn't make sense to me why we would build any kind of industrial development by a school. I mean, our kids, I think, in lots of ways are more vulnerable than adults. They aren't always thinking about should I be wearing a mask right now so that I'm, breathing in air differently? Or does it even matter? Those aren't things that you think about as a 16-year-old. They're not things you should have to think about as a 16-year-old. And additionally, West Virginia, in comparison to most other states, we have a lot of people who are above retirement age, who are kind of entering their more tender years. And that's another vulnerable population where they're more susceptible to risks from air quality. The Kanawha Valley in general has a long history of being a place where industry does what they want to do, particularly when we're thinking about chemical manufacturing.
Yeah.
And these people have had to deal with it for generations at this point. So it's not surprising, but it is frustrating. It doesn't feel fair, and it seems like an inappropriate place to build anything across from a high school. We don't pay enough attention to cumulative impacts, particularly when we're looking at air permitting, because this facility gets its permit and the facility next door to it gets its permit, but they're still right beside of each other, and both of them are still polluting the same amount of things that they would have been if they weren't right beside each other. So if there are two facilities that are, say, minor sources, and they're facilities that are I'm going to get a little technical here. Say they're putting out 99 tons per year, but they fall under one of the kind of source categories that puts 100 tons per year as the threshold to be a major source. You have two facilities right beside of each other that are 99 tons per year. Well, they're regulated as minor sources, but together you're looking at 198 tons per year of whatever that pollutant would be. And that would put that specific spot well above that minor source threshold. But that's not how the Clean Air Act decides to regulate them. And so if you end up with a bunch of minor sources all around each other, you're dealing with a lot more pollution than what our legislation really designed in terms of its goals to protect human health and the environment.
Right. So is that a Fed issue? Is that something that has to be addressed at the federal level?
Yeah, it's baked into the Clean Air Act. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't consider myself an expert on, the Kanawha Valley's issues. I'm, more familiar with Parkersburg's unfortunate legacy. But I do know that, throughout the valley, we have a strong legacy of these chemical manufacturing facilities and all of the various other facilities that go along with that. Institute is in a slightly different part of this Kanawha County, but by every metric that you look at other than kind of the per capita income one, because of how census tracts are designed, Institute is an environmental justice community because of how heavily polluted it has been over time. On the other end, there's the Belle area where they deal with all the same problems. And in these communities, what you see are higher cancer risks and higher respiratory issues and lower quality of life in general. And I do think that is a direct result of legacy pollution.
There's another facility in I don't know how far it is from there. Maybe that's in Institute, and it is Liberty One methanol. And so that's another petrochemical facility, right? And it came from Brazil. They moved it from Brazil and put it, okay, so you've got, is it West Virginia State University or West Virginia University?
West Virginia State
University. And then the former Union Carbide that became Dow, is that right? But Union Carbide, of course, is the company that had the Bhopal disaster where all those people died from a leak or an accident at that facility. So that was Dow, and now that's been decommissioned. So the community has been having maybe a little bit of break in the level of pollution in their community. But now, like university decommissioned, Union Carbide high ducts, and then now this other plant is going to be right on the other side of that.
Well, it already is, but they want to expand it, I think.
It's there, and they want to expand it. That's right. So they didn't get a break for very long from having that kind of an industrial pollution right there, like right in there.
Yeah, I don't know what the timeline was on that.
I don't know either. But I think that is just often the case, is that these communities, they don't often get breaks, and when they do, they tend to be short-lived. I think, I can think specifically, I'm going to go up the state quite a ways, but I'm thinking of Fallensby, West Virginia, wherein for a very long time they had a large source that I've heard reports from people that they can remember, getting out of school at the end of the day and the air being kind of smoggy. And that plant shut down a few years back. And those same people were like, wow, our air, it feels cleaner. And then not too long after, more proposals started coming in to do
more
different
petrochemicals,
things.
right? Yeah.
Different style, but still in the petrochemical realm. And, that tends to be the way it goes, is that for whatever reason, the people, the developers, and then I think our regulatory agencies and our governments in general, they put them in the same places. And, to me, it seems like they put them in places where they feel like they won't get very much pushback, or where they are comfortable with the risks associated with these facilities being passed on to those particular groups of people.
And
I think, we're sitting across from a number of very, very large houses across the river. And houses that they stick out in Charleston. They stick out anywhere in West Virginia, really. If there's a high school up in those hills, it's called George Washington, and if a facility of any type, I think, where there were concerns about what was going into the air was proposed across the street from George Washington, it would be a much different story. People would fight because they have the resources too.
They have the resources, and a part of resources is having the time. And that's why, I don't judge anybody. I don't, we all have our own decisions to make and our path to walk on. But, I've heard people, and maybe I've said it from time to time, like, why doesn't anybody do anything? They're like going to put 4 frac pads surrounding Barnesville. Why isn't anybody doing anything? Well, a lot of people are in survival mode. They're trying to hustle to make enough money, go work all day, single mom, come home, cook dinner, do the laundry, do the dishes, go to bed, get up. I mean, she doesn't have time to think about, oh my God, are they going to put a toxic plant next to our kids' school? Because there's not even room in her brain to even go there. So that's how they choose the areas where people are poor, they need jobs, they're too busy trying to survive to put up a fuss.
I think that when we look at that historically, that's how it's happened. And it doesn't seem like it's going to change. The idea of sacrifice zones is one that's never made sense to me, because what are we sacrificing it for, and what are we sacrificing? We aren't the people who get to make those decisions, unfortunately, but we all live with the consequences of them, whether it's people we know directly or it is just members of our community that should be able to live the same quality of life as anyone else in their community. We all suffer because they suffer. I mean, I think they industry historically talks about jobs, and they talk about, investment in the community, but thinking about the Clean Seas site facility, specifically, like, they've received, as far as I can remember, at least two different pools of money that have come from the state. So they've come from the taxpayers.
15 million promised or something is what I saw.
Yeah, I believe there's a 15 million forgivable loan. And then there was, back in 2023, when this kind of first, at least started making the news in ways that I saw, there was a memorandum of agreement signed with Governor Jim Justice and the Economic Development Authority for 50 million. Up to 50 million, I think, in investment was the way that was structured. And so...
But why? Why does... That's what I don't get. Like, what's so special, or what does Jim Justice think is so special about this facility that, I don't know?
There are probably lots and lots of good, educated guesses about, like, why these facilities are popping up now. Personally, it seems to me like when we're thinking about what is a plastics pyrolysis facility, well, we've heard a lot in the news lately because of some really good work from people that plastics recycling is not what has been cracked up to be. It's been a bit of a myth, and that's been the case for a pretty long time, that the public has been a little bit misled about the efficacy of plastic recycling. I think that kind of cultural feeling of like, oh, well, reduce, reuse, recycle, we're doing our part to kind of use things that make our lives easier, that make our lives more convenient, and so we don't have to worry about it as much. Without that kind of cultural thing, I think people do get really concerned about waste. I mean, some of the strongest protections we see, no matter where we are protections that are related to how waste is handled. And so without that kind of facade, I think we have to figure out a different way to address the plastics problem. And industry has to figure out a different way to make it seem like not as much of a problem if they want to keep producing it at the rates that they want to produce it.
That's the pyrolysis scheme.
I think that's part of it, because pyrolysis is not, it's a fancy scientific word, but it's not a new concept. And plastics pyrolysis specifically is not a new idea either. 50 years ago or so, it was being looked into, and they said this isn't something that's ready to go at scale. Today, it seems like that is probably still true, that it's not ready to go at scale. The technology, we know that it's possible to melt down plastics and extract gas and oil and whatever else from it and use that for some other purposes. But does it make sense to do that is a very different question. And for them, for people who are getting into this industry to develop it, I think the question is there a way that we can make money by doing this? And that is their chief concern.
I wanted to share a little more about this Liberty One methanol plant. Like I said, they moved it from Brazil. It would be capable of producing over 240,000 tons of methanol from natural gas every year. And according to the website, methanol production at Liberty One could be expanded to 350,000 tons in the coming years. It's a Czech company behind the project, and it has already announced plans to relocate a second 150,000 ton per day methanol plant from Central Europe to the Liberty One site in West Virginia, that's Institute.
I believe that's right.
That's an institute, and which has an ultimate legacy of pollution. I mean, isn't that kind of where chemical production started? Basically, yeah.
I have heard it described as the birthplace of the petrochemical industry.
Yeah.
I'm not enough of a historian to make that claim
We need
myself.
Alex Cole to be here to tell us that. Yeah, right.
But I definitely think that the Kanawha Valley and the Gulf South both share really, really deep and painful historical ties to the petrochemical industry. And Institute, I think, is the prime example of that in this region.
Right. And that's where this Liberty One is built and expanding, and sound like expanding more. And I'm so sorry for that community. They deserve better.
Well, and it's an interesting community for other reasons too. Like there's a large sports complex out there, and not far from that sports complex is a prison, and so when you're at the sports complex, sometimes you can see prisoners outside in the yard, and not far from either of those two vastly different realities is that kind of chemical legacy.
And then the university.
Yeah, West Virginia State, which is, West Virginia's only historically black college, and one of our land grant institutions is right there too, and has its own very, I think, painful history with its, what they would call themselves good neighbors, the folks who make up Dow and Union Carbide and all the various players who have been there throughout the years as names have changed, but the processes have remained.
And the pollution and the impacts to the community.
Yeah, I think there are kind of like two big ways that I think about that kind of bucket of thought. One of which is we've talked a lot about kind of the legacy of pollution in this region. And I don't think there's any doubt that legacy and that pollution was worse before the major environmental statutes were passed in the 70s. When we think about the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, they were both passed by Richard Nixon. While he was president, he wasn't the one who passed them. Congress had a lot to do with it too. Right. But it was a bit of a surprising kind of thing to come out. And now, we can look and see how far we've come. But back in the 70s, one of the main reasons the Clean Water Act was passed was because there was video evidence, or at least pictures of rivers on fire. Up in Pittsburgh, there was the Denora smog incident that killed people and made a lot of other people sick. Those were the things that were happening before, we had our major environmental statutes. And so today, it's absolutely the case that while we still deal with all of this pollution, and while this pollution is still harming people and the environment, things are better than they used to be. And they're better because as a society, we decided we needed to protect human health and the environment. And if we stop doing that, it doesn't seem at all possible that things wouldn't just get worse again. And so I think that is kind of, regulation is a big kind of hot button issue, as Stuart mentioned. And it's become kind of a dirty word for a lot of people. We think about bureaucratic red tape and administrative red tape, and they're stopping me from doing XYZ thing. But the bottom line is that most of the time, environmental regulations don't really stop you from doing the thing. They're just regulating the way that you do it. And the complaint probably is that if you're regulated too much, it doesn't become profitable to do it anymore.
But it's like regulating them too much, regulating them to the extent that is necessary to protect human health and the environment would be too much for them economically. If they really had to protect human health and the environment, people's health over profit, by law, by design, I don't think we'd be able to keep doing, they wouldn't be able to keep operating.
Yeah, I wonder about that too. Like, how profitable do they really need to be to keep operating?
Right.
What margins are they looking for, such that they can say that it's worth it to sacrifice various communities in these ways? And it doesn't seem to me that it has to be the case that, okay, maybe it's not as profitable as you want, but probably you can still make money. I bet you can make more than minimum wage, more than the average annual income of the places where these facilities usually go in place. And doing that while you're properly regulated, that's part of the game. I think one of the things that law in the United States particularly struggles to capture is what economists refer to as externalities. And that's a big thing in the environmental kind of sphere as well, is like, how do we think about the true cost of these things? What are all of the externalities for pollution? And it's a really hard question to answer because, I think the bottom line is we don't actually always know how harmful some of these things are. We don't know how far those costs to society are going to stretch. But if I'm trying to think of a simple kind of analogy. If I am cutting down trees to sell firewood, in that process, I have to think about what is all of that costing all along the way. And that starts with the loss of the value of the tree. It starts with how the loss of that tree affects the ecosystem, but we also have to look downwind of it. We have to look further into the future than I think we're always able to under our current scheme. And we have to think about, okay, well, what happens when that firewood is burned? That is something that should be included in the full cost of what these things cost society, not just what they cost the producer of them.
Right.
And I think that is a big gap in how we look at all of these things across the board. The second piece of things that I kind of wanted to touch on is goes a little bit into that direct frustration, is at least the frustration that people have with regulation, which is that red tape. And I think one of the things that people feel is red tape is the permitting process. But as these environmental laws were designed, the Clean Air Act included, part of that permitting process is public participation. That is explicitly provided for, is that this isn't just a conversation between the person or the group proposing to build the thing and the regulatory agency. There's a place for the public in that process. And so, when a developer decides, I'm going to build this thing and I need this permit, they submit an application. At least in West Virginia, and I under the Clean Air Act generally, the first step is that the regulatory body decides whether that application is complete. And once the application is complete, from there, the regulatory clock starts ticking, wherein the agency has a certain amount of time to start making decisions about that facility. In that time frame, and depending on the source, the facility, whether it's a major source or a minor source, whether it's under the Clean Water Act or the Clean Air Act, different timelines do apply. But generally, once that completeness determination has been made, is when you start to see public participation coming into play. As United States citizens, we always have a right to petition our government under the First Amendment. But in the permitting process, there are specific procedures that lay out that the agency has to consider significant comments that are made to them about facilities when it's a facility that's subject to a comment period. And when those public processes are taken advantage of, I think one thing that is usually seen is that permits can end up being more protective of human health and the environment. And so, while it often feels like a game where the odds are not in our favor, are not in the public's favor, they do have a role in that process, and it's one that should not be given up, because it's really our best and strongest way to advocate for ourselves. And then, you submit your comments, and you hope that they're taken seriously by the regulators, and then they issue a draft permit, or they issue a final permit usually afterwards, or they deny the permit if it's one that doesn't meet the criteria. But that happens far more rarely than I think folks would like to see.
Yes. But I do think that it's a really good point that a lot of people maybe they're busy but it doesn't take that much time to submit a comment. and whether it's influences this decision or not, you did something. You know, you did your part. You did what your role is in that whole process. I mean, the community, the public has a role in that permitting process, right? And so by taking the time to make the comment, whether they listen or not, it's still, you should feel good about that, and you did what you were supposed to do.
I think that is right, and I think, you know, in addition to that, in some ways we do what we can, and if everybody does what they can, you know, maybe for me it's not that much, and for you it's not that much, but if it's all three of us and it's 10 of our neighbors, then it's a lot more. And we aren't, as the public, we aren't massive corporations where we're hiring people to work on these things, and where we have, you know, in some cases shareholders who want to see things happen so that profits are derived. So we have to pool our resources a little differently. We have to think about what each of us can contribute and what we can do as a collective that we couldn't do as individuals. And through that, not only do we get to say, yes, I did what I could, but we get to build community with each other. We get to know our neighbors a little bit better. And we also have a better chance of influencing the regulatory bodies to take their roles of protecting the human health and environment a little bit more seriously. The Clean Air Act isn't really the best mechanism for true democratic processes and what gets built and where it gets built. But depending on the jurisdiction, the state laws, the local laws, and potentially even different federal laws, there are absolutely, you know, democratic processes that can take place that say we don't want this type of facility in our community. Some states, West Virginia being one of them, make that harder to do than others on a local level. And it really does depend on the industry. But, you know, that's not an uncommon thing to see happen, where the vast majority of a community has said, we don't want this here, and it happens anyway. And that, you know, I think shows one of the weaknesses of our environmental statutes, but it also means that we need to think a little bit more creatively about what other tools within the legal system we can utilize to you know, try and have our communities be built the way we want them to be built. We're the ones who live here, so we should decide.
Yeah, even beyond like environmental laws, it just seems like I did real estate for a couple years, and what strikes me is that I'm starting to feel more and more like realtors have more fiduciary duties to their clients than politicians do. It just seems like on some level we should be able to expect our politicians to legally and enforceably be more responsive to the community wants and needs.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I think, you know, gosh, in recent years, it feels like no matter how you kind of feel politically, the people who are supposed to represent you don't really care what you think. That they have outside interests that ignore the needs of their true constituents, the people who democratically vote them into office. And that's an entire wormhole of problems around why we've allowed our democratic republic to be, I think, degraded in that way. But it absolutely is the case that our politicians are not accountable on a day-to-day basis when they are in office to their constituents the way that I think we would like them to be, in ways that might make them make different decisions. One of the things that is often pushed back on when we think about regulation and the regulatory red tape is how deeply it cuts into profits, how unprofitable it makes the work and the production of it. But when we actually look at the numbers that these companies are producing, they continue to make more money year after year. And if they don't they go out of business, because that's the way that capitalism works. And the case is that not a lot of these people are going out of business. They continue to find their profits, and they do that despite what they consider to be an overly protective regulatory environment.
That's so true. Well, thank you, Andrew. This has been really nice to see you first and to sit next to the river. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I hope to connect again in this way soon if you're willing.
It's always a pleasure to see you. And I'm so glad you guys got to be back in Charleston. And I'm only a phone call away.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Peace.
Peace.